Skyward Sword HD is finally out, which means every 3D Zelda title before Breath of the Wild has had an HD or 3D remaster. Breath of the Wild was the first main Zelda game to be originally released in HD. While HD consoles started with the PS3 and Xbox 360, which were in the mid-2000s, Nintendo was half a decade behind their competitors, as they didn't upgrade to HD until 2012 with the Wii U. And this started an era where older Nintendo games were given a second chance in HD, with Wind Waker and Twilight Princess both being ported to the console with HD remasters. But before even the HD ports, when the 3DS was still around, Nintendo also decided to remake the older N64 titles, making them portable and even in actual 3D. Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask were both ported to the 3DS, with a complete overhaul in graphics and many other changes, giving them the 3D in their title. And these ports felt more like remakes than remasters, with tons of quality of life changes, the overall graphic change, the UI changes that would utilize both screens, and overall a much more polished look from the original N64 releases. Unlike the Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, and now Skyward Sword, which all got HD remasters, keeping the original graphics and only upscaling them with minor lighting improvements, along with other quality of life changes, but not nearly as impactful as the 3DS remakes. Regardless, every 3D main Zelda game before Breath of the Wild was in need of some kind of port to play today, which is kinda crazy to think about. Like, are any of these remasters or remakes really needed? Is Nintendo, like other companies, just rehashing older titles for easier sales? I think we can all agree that the 3DS ports were more than worth it, because they weren't just ports, they were complete remakes of the games. They took both really outdated games and gave them a second life, with huge improvements in graphics and many other quality of life changes. But what about the HD remasters? Remasters have always been looked at as the lazy way to port a game for a modern audience, as remastering usually uses the original assets of the game, unlike in remakes where they literally remake the entire game. And when comparing the HD PS3 remaster of Shadow of the Colossus to the HD remake of Shadow of the Colossus for the PS4, you can truly understand the difference. One is a complete reimagining of the game to fit in modern graphics today, while one just upscales the already outdated game. But there has been a fine line between the two. For example, both Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition and the Neo Replicant Remaster for PS4 found an amazing balance between the two. As in both of these remasters, all main characters have completely updated visuals, looking like very recent games, while the game's environment was only upscaled from the original. But oddly, the blend of these two can mesh together very well without standing out too much. Sadly, that isn't the case with the HD Zelda remasters. Yeah, I feel like Link could have looked a bit better. I mean, look at the difference between the two Shulks. Yeah, surprisingly updating at least the character model can go a long way. Though of course, sometimes remakes can take away from what made the original game special. So sometimes keeping the game untouched outside of just upscaling the game and remastering it is really all the game needs. And this can sorta apply to all three HD remasters. Sorta. With Wind Waker HD being the first ever Zelda game we got to experience in HD. And it's fair to say that up until Breath of the Wild, it was by far the best looking Zelda game graphically. As unlike Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword, Wind Waker had cel-shaded graphics, which while hated at the time, helped the game age gracefully. As with the HD upscale and improvements in lighting, Wind Waker does not look like a game from the early 2000s. It honestly looks better than some games that came out in the last few years. And this didn't just apply with the game's graphics, as the HD remaster also improved tons of mechanics from the original game, making the original game seem almost unplayable in comparison. As in the original game, sailing, which was the main way of travel, was extremely slow. But in the HD upgrade, you can ride your bow at what seems like 10 times the speed from the original game. And on top of that, you can even change the wind direction on the fly without having to play the Song of Winds each time. These changes, along with a few others, truly fixed the most tedious issues the game had. And in the end, it made the HD remaster feel like the definitive way to experience the game. Honestly, when looking at Wind Waker HD, it really shows how Nintendo wanted to keep the classics alive and modernize it in the best possible way. And while the Wind Waker remaster really modernized the game for today, the Twilight Princess remaster didn't feel that exact way. While also being ported to the Wii U in HD, Twilight Princess HD upscaled the game's graphics, but unlike the Wind Waker, it didn't age as gracefully. Twilight Princess went for a much more realistic look, which Nintendo couldn't really achieve at the time. So when upscaled, it really amplified how outdated everything looked. But in comparison to how the original games were extremely low resolution, the HD upgrade was still appreciated. But outside the graphics, the quality of life changes were also more than needed, as originally Twilight Princess came out for both the GameCube and Wii, which gave us two versions of the game, but completely different. As the GameCube version had Link left-handed, with the entire game playable with normal controls, but the Wii version on the other hand used motion controls, which made Link use his right hand instead. Since most people are known to have their dominant hand be right, Nintendo decided to mirror the entire game to fix that. Yeah, the Wii version of Twilight Princess is completely mirrored to the GameCube version. This made it really hard for me to go from one version to another, making it feel like the game lacked a definitive way to play it. And it didn't help that only the Wii version played the game in widescreen, making both versions lack something from the other. Luckily, thanks to the HD remaster, we can now play the game the way it's meant to, with Link remaining left-handed and normal controls, but with HD visuals and tons of other quality of life changes. Now we finally made it to Skyward Sword HD, what I considered the game that needed the remaster the most. From the game's original release, it already felt aged and outdated, being released on the Wii's last year, before Nintendo would upgrade to HD with the Wii U, and using its already tired motion controls Wii players had enough of. And the motion controls didn't just suck because of the controls, but also its hardware. As anytime you tried to play the game, you had to first calibrate your Wiimote by placing it on a flat surface, and always make sure your sensor bar is perfectly adjusted and that you're the perfect distance from it. And on top of that, who can forget also having fully charged batteries. And it's not like you could even use standard Wiimotes, as you had to use the ones with Wii Motion Plus integrated, or buy the Wii Motion Plus add-on and add it to your Wiimote. So already the game needed many improvements, even just from the controls. It came out at the end of the Wii's life cycle, which only supported 480p. And again, most games were already in HD, making Skyward Sword really fall behind. Funny enough actually, when Nintendo first showed screenshots of the game way back in 2011, they were in HD. It's like Nintendo forgot how crappy the Wii console was and was originally developing the game in HD. And this was really weird to me when I saw how much they downgraded the game after its first reveal, being pushed to 480p to run on the Wii, which was a huge downgrade in quality. I mean, technically we saw Skyward Sword in HD way back in 2011. But now with the game finally released in HD, we can see how Nintendo originally planned to give us this game. And while Nintendo did find a solution to remove their motion controls completely in this HD remaster, the game honestly feels only designed to have them, making the button controls in this HD remaster feel actually really weird when swinging the sword. It actually makes me prefer the motion controls over them. But unlike in the Wii version, this time I can use my Joy-Cons, which are far more accurate with motion than the Wiimote ever was. And with no need of a sensor bar or to be sitting at a certain distance, the Switch really removes the frustrations the Wii gave with its motion controls. So surprisingly, even if Nintendo didn't remove the motion controls in this HD remaster, it still would have been really fun. as the motion controls are far more accurate than before and are much better to play on the Joy-Cons. So in the end, Skyward Sword HD feels just as needed as every other Zelda title that was given a second chance, especially in an era where all games are in high definition. So while it's weird to have HD or even 3D attached to the titles of all of these classic Zelda games, I'm really glad they exist. It really shows how the Legend of Zelda series has games that are truly timeless. Anyways, I can't wait for the day to where we can play all of these games on the Switch. Hopefully Nintendo decides to port both Wind Waker and Twilight Princess HD from the Wii U to the Switch. And maybe even possibly Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask 3D now ported to the Switch in HD. Or even more older titles like their top-down Zelda games, similar to how they remade Link's Awakening for the Switch. In general, remasters, remakes, as long as you love the game, finding a new way to play it will always be worth it, despite what others say about the price or comparisons to many other remakes or remasters. Anyways, what do you guys think of Zelda remakes and remasters? And what are your thoughts on the Skyward Sword HD remaster? Please let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. But that about does it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. As always, I've been ZeldaMaster, and I'll see you all in the next one.